Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about writing the introductions for our Paper 1 commentaries for the IB English Literature exam. This is relevant for people both in standard level and higher level. We've already talked about the differences, but the strategy we use is the same, even if the thoroughness of our reading and our writing is a bit more in the case of higher level papers. In any case, this is going to be relevant for everyone taking the IB English Literature Paper 1 exam or a mock exam coming up this spring. So really quickly, I want to review the steps of our strategy and reiterate them to you. And I want to review the situation, the ideas, and some of the important features of the poem we've been working with and the poem that I assigned you, and the past paper I assigned you for homework. Sound good?
Yep. Yes.
Good, okay. So the first step of the strategy is to read the text for situation and ideas. The second step is to close read for literary features. The third step is to group the literary features so that you can plan the commentary. The fourth step is to write the commentary, and the fifth step is to proofread the commentary. Today, we're finally at writing the commentary. I know a lot of you guys are eager for this moment to arrive because a lot of you guys came here thinking that what I'm not good at is writing. Who here felt like writing was your weakest part of this? Great. And maybe it is, but hopefully you've learned that good reading is foundational to good academic writing in a course on English literature. Okay, so we've done enough reading, we've done enough analysis to feel strong enough to get ready to write. So very quickly, when we're reading for the situation, right, we know this corresponds to the 5 categories of literary theory that we borrow from our friend Aristotle. We have plot, character, setting, style, theme. The situation corresponds to which 3 of these? Rob?
Plot, character, setting.
Good, so situation. Excellent. And when we're looking for ideas, we're looking for baby versions of what category here?
Theme.
Theme, good, excellent. And as I told you guys before, the relationship between an idea and a theme is similar to the relationship between a point on the coordinate plane and a line, right? If we're looking at the x and the y axis, let's say I have a point right here. How many lines can go through this point?
Infinite.
Infinite lines, right? So for example, if an idea is love, right? There are a lot of different themes about the idea love. I'm going to use an upward slope for a positive one. Love is all you need. A downward slope for a negative one. Love is a battlefield. Those are cliches, but they're complete ideas on love. Those would be themes. But for now, we just worry about the idea, which is like the seed of the theme that's going to sprout from our commentary and our analysis by the end of our commentary. Make sense? Good. Okay. And the second step, we're going to close read for literary features. Now, literary features, by process of elimination, we can affiliate with which remaining category of literary theory?
Style.
Style, good. Now, what are the different subcategories of style that we care about? So, for example, there are a lot of different stylistic features, right? But we can put them into buckets. What's one bucket of stylistic features?
Sound effects.
Sound effects, good. So we have sound effects. What's another one?
Figurative language.
Good. What's the definition of figurative language, Steve?
It's language that works on multiple levels.
Multiple levels, and one of those levels needs to be non-literal, right? Good. Sound effects, figurative language. What's another one, Joseph?
There's structural.
Structure, definitely. Good. What's another one, Rob?
Sensory images.
Sensory imagery. And then there's another one that we covered at the very end of our second lesson, or our third lesson. And that's what?
Author or
Speaker or narrator, right? The convention is to refer to the voice from which a poem is spoken as the speaker. Some of you guys might call it the persona. That's fine, follow your teacher's lead, right? But in the case of prose, the convention is to call it not the speaker, but the narrator, right? The one who tells the story. Good, so when we're grouping literary features and planning the commentary, we're putting them into these groups. As I mentioned, there are more sophisticated ways to plan your commentary, but this way, you're definitely able to get a 7 doing this way properly, and that's what we're going to focus on in this course. We're going to write the commentary, which is our task today, and then we're going to proofread the commentary, which we're going to talk about next lesson. Make sense, guys? Good. So let's review the information we have about the text we've been using throughout class. So the text by Wordsworth, I wandered lonely as a cloud. What do we think could be a one-sentence summary of what's going on in I wandered lonely as a cloud? What do we remember that being? Steve?
A man has pleasant memories of nature's beauty after taking a walk.
A man has pleasant memories of nature's beauty after taking a walk. Terrific, okay? I'm gonna say the speaker, that's the man, right? Now, we might assume this is Wordsworth, and we really don't care if it is or not. We can talk about the intentionality fallacy again. We've talked about it before. I'm going to call it the speaker. So the speaker recalls, the beauty of daffodils he encountered on a walk. What's one of the ideas explored in this poem? Joseph, what's one?
The idea of being suddenly struck by a beautiful scene when you're walking and not looking for something like that.
Good. Now that sounds to me like you're getting to the unifying idea, which is great because we're going to get there today. But to simplify what you said, because again we're looking for the seeds of the themes, let's say something like the beauty of nature, right? Because it was specifically a natural kind of beauty that he encountered. Okay? And what's another idea? Gavin, what's another idea that you think is going on in that poem?
I get an idea. I think it's not so correct, but I write it down as a lonely guy with no other help.
A lonely guy with no other help. Sum that up in one word.
Oh.
That's more a situation, right? But what's an idea explored through that situation? You said lonely. We could say loneliness. Someone used another word that starts with an S that's a little bit more neutral. What was that word? Heather, I think you said it?
Solitude.
Solitude. So I'm going to put that up here. And again, Gavin, this tells me that you need to refer back to your notes from previous lessons more carefully. Remember, everything we do builds on the previous week's lesson, so make sure that that's fresh in your head at the beginning of every lesson.
Okay.
Okay? Good. I know you were a little bit sick and absent, and that's okay. We can talk about how you can make that up through private lessons or on your own a little bit later. Good. A third one, anyone want to throw something else out?
Joy.
Joy. What did you have, Joseph?
I don't know if it's already up there, but reminiscing afterwards.
Reminiscence, good. Oh, beauty of nature seems to entail joy, kind of. Not necessarily, but kind of, so I'm going to leave that. I like reminiscence. That's a fancy word for what?
Memory.
Good. We could say memory just as well, but reminiscence seems to me quite important in this poem, especially in the final stanza, as we talked about. Okay, and you guys, we've already been over the different literary features. The structure, for example, we have quatrains, rhyming, alternating rhyme scheme. Lots of imagery of the daffodils, some of which is figurative language. We have a lot of sound effects going on as well, including the rhyme which I just referenced. And what point of view is the poem told from?
First person.
First person point of view, good. So the reason why I'm reminding us of this information is because the way I'm going to teach you how to write, beginning with introductions today, is I'm going to show you a model introduction based off of this very classic poem. But then once I teach you the strategy for writing each sentence, you're going to compose one on the other past paper that I assigned you for homework. So I'm not going to write it on the board, but just for the sake of getting on the same page, in anticipation of what we're about to do, what was the situation of the November 2003 standard level prose extract? Rob, what did you have?
A group of children survive a shipwreck and are washed up on a beach feeling confused.
Good, so a group of children, probably girls we can tell, I don't think that's forcing it, but children work just as well, are confused and
Survive a shipwreck.
survive a shipwreck. But do we know it's a shipwreck?
Could have been an apple.
Not necessarily. So let's say a disaster at sea is the phrase I like to recommend because it strongly connotes shipwreck. Yes, Joseph?
It says both the boats were gone.
Could be the rescue boats.
Yeah.
It's fine. Listen, if you said shipwreck here, you're going to be fine. But as a word of caution, it's best to kind of tone it down a little bit and not get too specific because even though English teachers like to say, hey, whatever you interpret is fine, a lot of times if they don't agree with you, they're going to punish you when it comes time to award marks. So I think you're right in this case. We do have sufficient evidence to call it a shipwreck. But just as a kind of guideline moving forward, let's say disaster at sea, for the sake of being careful. You certainly won't be penalized for saying that rather than the shipwreck anyway. Good. What are some ideas explored here?
I said confusion after a trauma.
Confusion, good. Or disorientation, good. What else?
A return to life.
Okay, return to life, resuscitation, or reawakening. Sure, that works for me. What else?
Pain.
Pain and suffering, right? It's very important there. Good. Survival, maybe, something like that. Yes?
Depersonalization.
Depersonalization of who?
when you're stunned, you lose the sense of personhood and it slowly comes back.
Good, so depersonalization I think we can couple as kind of the flip side of awakening or resuscitation, right? There is a state of depersonalization that we encounter when we first read the text, and gradually I think we'd agree that they awaken to repersonalization, we could say. So sure, that's fine to think of as well. Make sense, guys? Good. So let me show you how, just with these first two steps, right, or 3 steps, knowing the situation in a really basic level, having an idea of the ideas, and having at least like 15 to 25 literary features you can talk about that are grouped into these categories, you'll be able to write the kind of introduction that will earn you a 7, or at the very least a 6 on the paper 1 commentary. Sound good? Good. Who here thinks that writing introductions is like one of the most painful parts of writing? You're like, you know what you want to say, but it's like, how do I get started? Right? Or conclusions as well oftentimes, okay? So we're gonna make sure that you write your introductions quickly, effectively, and in a way that frames your whole paper. So, I'm on page 70 in your workbook, writing introductions. Please turn to this page. Okay. So the last lesson we talked about writing body paragraphs, and the reason why we started with body paragraphs is that those are the engines that drive our analysis. They're the most important, right? But would you buy a car that just had an engine?
No.
No, there are certain other components that are necessary to make it not look weird, for one thing, and 2, to allow the engine to function properly in a way that makes it useful for us in our everyday lives. Similarly, today we're going to learn to write the introductions, which are also important because they frame your analysis. They're also important because when we encounter the text, it's a coherent whole, right? It's not just a group of onomatopoeia, a group of metaphors, a group of similes neatly arranged into little piles for us. Rather, it's a coherent whole. So one of the functions of the commentary is to kind of break down that coherent whole, analyze its constituent parts, and rebuild it according to a unified interpretation. So the introduction is going to kind of begin to break it down a little bit so that the body paragraphs can really zoom in an analytical way into the individual parts that make up the literary work. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look on page 70 at the ideal introduction. This is an introduction that definitely could begin a 7-level commentary on this poem, even though it's a little old-fashioned. It's in the public domain, that's why we chose it. William Wordsworth's poem, quote, "I wandered lonely as a cloud," narrates the speaker's memorable encounter with a field of beautiful daffodils. The poem develops and explores ideas about nature, solitude, and imagination. Throughout the poem, figurative language describes the relationship between the speaker and nature. Sensory imagery allows the reader to vividly imagine the beauty of the flowers. Poetic structure suggests the restorative effect nature has on the individual, and the unique perspective of the speaker offers the reader access to his thoughts and impressions. The overall effect of Wordsworth's manipulation of language in the poem is to suggest that while humans may never achieve perfect harmony with nature, they are able to overcome the sadness otherwise characteristic of solitude with the help of natural beauty. Do we think this is a good introduction?
Yes.
Yes, it's not the only way to write a good introduction, but it's one way to write a good introduction that's good enough to get you top marks on this paper. Okay? What's good about it?
Basically, it's a roadmap for the rest of the paper.
Good. Everyone write down in the table here, write down it roadmaps the paper. What one sentence in particular seems to roadmap specifically? Heather, what do you think?
Throughout the poem, figurative language describes the blah blah, sensory imagery the blah, poetic
Good.
structure the blah.
Excellent. Pause there. So what order do you think I'm going to talk about things, by the way?
In that order.
In precisely that order. Good. What else does this introduction do that's important? Even if it's basic, but still important for a commentary.
It introduces what we're going to be talking about. It names the poem.
Good. So it names the poem, and by the way, what punctuation marks do I have around the title?
Cool.
Quotation marks, okay? Now, I use Chicago Manual of Style conventions, which say that you want to use double quotations for poems and underline or italicize the titles of prose works that are like long, like novel length, okay? If you're using UK conventions, you might put quotes around everything. But the point is you need a punctuation mark to set off the title. Do not just write the title. What do you need with the title, Gavin?
The heading.
The heading, but what does that mean?
The summary of the paragraph.
No, listen to me again. If you have the title of the work, when you have the title of the work in your introduction, you need to have punctuation to show that it's the title. Here, what punctuation do we have?
double quotation.
Quotation marks, good, okay? In addition to the title, what else do I have? Joseph?
Well, you have a thesis at the end.
I have a thesis at the end, good. Before we move on to that one, right next to the title, I have the author of the poem. This is important as well. You'll find this at the bottom of the past paper that they give you, or the present paper when it's the real thing. In addition, I say that it's a poem, right? So the genre, basically, I'm stating. Good. At the end, as Joseph mentioned, there's something like a thesis. We're going to call this a unifying idea, okay? Remember, a commentary isn't an argumentative paper first and foremost. Now, any paper is argumentative in the sense that implicitly the point of view you're advocating is kind of in competition with other possible points of view. But this is different from some of the other academic papers you write. Your purpose here is really to kind of scuff up the surface of the poem and reveal some of the meanings that might not be initially evident. It's not necessarily to make like a completely formal and unified argument, although inevitably our argument ends up being something like what the overall import of the poem is. That's going to be clear as we move forward in this lesson, okay? Good. Anything else we want to mention about this?
Question?
Yep.
I'm under the impression that things that you talk about should actually come from the poem itself.
Yes.
But
good.
I don't see any reference in the poem to the idea that humans may never achieve perfect harmony with nature. That seems to be this person's own interpretation.
Well, for one thing, so when you say that you're supposed to stick to the poem itself, what that means is I shouldn't be saying that Wordsworth is a romantic poet and the Romantic period was on the heels of the Industrial Revolution in England and the Napoleonic Wars, and it harkened back to a pre-industrial idealized conception of nature. So yes, we stick to the poem in the sense that we're not historicizing the poem, we're not talking about the biography of the author, which is easy because the kind of poems we're going to see on the real test aren't going to be like Wordsworth and Seamus Heaney and like these big name poets we may have studied before. However, it does say in the marking criteria that not only are you allowed to, you're expected to create a personal response to it. So I think taking the experience of this one man and making a little bit of a comment about life in general, I think that's okay. Okay, but I appreciate your sensitivity to that. And if you wanted to make your unifying idea closer to the poem, that certainly wouldn't be a problem. Okay? Good. Let's turn the page. So, one of the marking criteria is knowledge and understanding. So we can think about the situation we create as sort of a safety net for our scores. By stating what's going on basically is going to make it clear to the examiner that we understand the literary work and we're able to process it at least on a basic level. Everything else we do extends from this foundation of the situation. So it's appropriate that the first sentence of our commentary is devoted to delineating what the situation is, as well as some other important information about the text. Make sense? Good. So if you take a look in the box here, I have the situation sentence. I'm actually going to write it on the board. Rob, could you read it aloud for me? Or hold on 1 second for me to erase this. Everyone okay with this?
Yep.
Good. You should have it from our first lesson. Okay, Rob, read it for me, please.
William Wordsworth poem. I wandered lonely as a cloud.
Yep.
Narrates the speaker's memorable encounter with a field of beautiful daffodils.
Good. Okay, so this is my first sentence. Is this fancy? No, it's straightforward, and it should be, right? Not everything we need to say needs to be on the level of like some crazy interpretation. We'll get there, okay? We're gonna build our way there, and in a sense we're scaffolding our way to a more sophisticated interpretation by starting on a basic level. Also, by the way, guys, do you guys ever feel like when you start a paper, you don't really know what's going on? It's not till you finish your paper that you kind of get your fullest ideas? That definitely happens here because you're writing the whole thing and reading it within 90 minutes or 2 hours in the case of higher level. So by starting easy and kind of leaving our later portions of our commentary for the bigger ideas on a more sophisticated level, we're making sure that we don't need to go back and rewrite our introduction. Because at the end of the day, there is time for some proofreading and some revision, but there's not going to be enough time to overhaul your introduction. Okay? Good. So let's ask some questions about this sentence. Who's the author?
Wordsworth.
Wordsworth. Good. What is the title?
I wandered lonely as a cloud.
Good. I wandered lonely as a cloud. I have the ellipses here just for the sake of efficiency. What's the situation? Pretty much the rest of the sentence, right? The speaker encounters. Notice how when we first write it, it's a sentence, but now I need to subordinate it to make it a part of another sentence. Does that make sense, everybody? Right? Good. And notice this verb here as well, narrates. What does narrates mean as a verb?
Tells.
Tells a story of, especially. Good. Narrates and describes are two great verbs for writing our situation sentences. Some other ones that are good would be reflects on. What does it mean to reflect on something?
To look back on it and think.
To look back on it, especially a past event, and to think deeply about it, right? And to kind of consider it with the benefit of a little time having transpired since that event took place. These are all good verbs. You can write these down in your notebooks. Good. Yep, and is that an active verb or verb phrase?
Yes.
Yes, it's active. Okay. Basically, keep it active. Turn the page. Now, who here is weak at writing? Makes a lot of grammar mistakes. Okay. I'm going to give you a formula right now that, just like the quadratic formula, if you're able to plug in the right stuff from your reading, every sentence of this commentary is going to be reduced to a formula. I'm going to show you guys in later lessons and maybe in private lessons how you can add some of your own touch to it and make it more sophisticated. But this commentary is basically going to write itself as long as you can read thoughtfully. And I know that you can because we spent a lot of time working on that so far. So let's take a look. We have two formulas right here for writing situation sentences. And we need three terms. We need to know the author. We need to know the title. And we need to know the situation. And if you notice, guys, number 1 is for prose passages. Write prose next to it. And number 2 is for poems. Again, I'm using the North American conventions for punctuating a title. You don't have to use those, but if you're not sure, go ahead and use mine, because I think they're better. Good. So what I want to do right now, guys, take a look at these. The prose passage from author's title describes or narrates the situation. Author's poem title describes or narrates the situation. Very basic. This is the syntax that we need to plug in our knowledge of the poem to begin writing efficiently and automatically in a way that's going to get us a lot of marks. So, what I want you guys to do right now is remind me. The passage about the girls on the beach, you're going to write a sentence for this now. The passage about the girls on the beach. Who's the author of that passage? Who can tell me?
Marianne Wiggins.
Marianne Wiggins. I like that name. Sounds friendly. What's the title of the overall work? It's at the bottom.
John Dollar.
John Dollar. And is this prose or poetry?
Prose.
Which means, what should I do to the title?
Underline.
Underline it. The one exception is short stories. Generally, these are going to be from novels. If you see the title italicized at the bottom of your paper, it means you should underline it. Because after all, when you're handwriting, can you italicize?
No.
Not really, and it's weird when people try to be honest with you. So just underline it. What's the situation? Remind me again. A group of girls or a group of children
Survived a disaster at sea and are washed up on the beach feeling confused.
So what I want you guys to do right now is I want you to write a situation sentence at the bottom of page 72. Right now, as if it were the first sentence in an introduction to a commentary on this past paper. Go. I'm going to set up my board while you guys do this. Just use the formula. Make sure after you plug the situation in that it flows as a sentence. Sorry. Good. Begin writing, Gaben. I want to see yours. I'm going to call on you in a minute. Okay? Just use this formula, number 2. Hey guys, doing better. Excellent. Good. Excellent. Good job. I know it kind of takes the magic out of it doing it this way, but it's okay. There'll be plenty of time for magic later. Quick, David. Why are you... Dude, the point is, you know math, right?
Yes.
If I'm using the quadratic formula on an exam, do I write a squared plus or minus the square root of b, whatever? Or do I plug in numbers for a and b?
Just wait on the letter.
No. You're a math guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to use the quadratic formula, I just write in the letters, or do I put numbers in place of the letters?
If you want really to do the calculation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, same thing. You're not just writing a and t. The point is to use this formula by plugging in who A is, the author, plugging in what T is, the title, plugging in what S is, the situation. Does that make sense?
Okay, I understand.
Make sense?
Okay.
Okay, good. Rob, could you read nice and slowly and nice and loudly what your situation sentence is?
The prose passage from Marianne Wiggins' John Dollar describes a group of children who survive a disaster at sea and are washed up on a beach feeling confused.
Excellent. Gaben, give a high five to Rob. Yeah, you guys are literary scholars now. Good job. And what did you underline there, Rob?
John Dollar.
Good job. Always underline it, right? Because it's the title of a novel. Make sense? Anyone have a question about theirs? No? See how it works? See how we're using everything we did in our first steps? Now it's time to use the ideas we came up with. This is the easiest sentence to write. For the ideas sentence, we're introducing these ideas that are going to blossom into themes by the end of our paper. But for now, it suffices to keep them nice and simple so that you have room for them to grow. Otherwise, you're going to kind of waste all of your good ideas in the beginning, and you risk stating them a bit clumsily, whereas you'll be in a better position to state them eloquently later on in your paper. Okay? So here's an example about William Wordsworth, right? The ideas we came up with are beauty of nature, solitude, reminiscence. We didn't say imagination, but I have imagination up here. Let's take a look at my sentence. The poem develops and explores ideas about nature, solitude, and imagination. Very basic. So, what are the ideas that I have in this sentence? What ideas? Nature, solitude, and imagination. 3 is a good rule of thumb. 2 is okay as well. Okay? So, to write this sentence, all you need to know is, or are the ideas that are explored in the literary piece that you're dealing with, right? So, for the one about Marianne Wiggins that we're writing on right now, what are the ideas we came up with?
There was pain.
Pain or suffering, good. Confusion or disorientation. We had depersonalization and kind of like awakening, which again is kind of tied up in this. Survival. By the way, guys, if the Wordsworth poem is about the beauty of nature, is this also about nature?
Yes.
Is it about the beauty of nature?
No.
What's it about?
Harshness.
The harshness of nature, right? Something like that. So we might be able to say something like the ferocity of nature. Good, I like it. Right, good. So, I would like you guys to use this information very quickly to write your idea sentence in the space below. A little bit later, we're going to build it all back together. And I'm going to set this up. You guys should be done with this right now. Ideas sentence. Steve, what do you have?
The passage explores ideas of suffering, confusion, and the ferocity of nature.
The passage explores ideas about suffering, confusion, and the ferocity of nature. Good. Notice how Steve's saying passage, right? Some of you might think it's really easy, but out of 100 students, one will always accidentally write poem rather than passage. So I advise you to not be that guy, right? Be very careful that you're referring to it as a passage. One mistake like that probably won't cost you, but if you have a couple typos, a couple grammar mistakes, you're doing that. Overall, what impression is your paper going to create? Not so good, right? It's going to make it look sloppy, like you don't really know what you're doing. So try to be as precise as possible. Good. Gavin, what do you have?
I have some
Don't tell me,
order
don't-
change. Okay.
Huh?
The order is changed. I mean,
Just
the
write
idea.
it, that's fine.
Okay.
Read it.
The passage develops and explores idea about confusion, survival, philosophy of nature, and pain.
Good. You said idea or ideas?
Ideas.
Good. Okay, perfect sentence right there, Gavin.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
You're going to benefit from this. Good. You're the target audience. Turn the page. Page 74. Just a little caveat right here, guys. There's an implicit formula here going on, but this is not the only way you could write this introduction. And in a sense, you have the opportunity to personalize your writing formulas, right? You don't need to necessarily say, like, the passage develops and explores ideas about. In fact, you could create your own one. Like, one of the I that, or several of the I that are essential to the meaning of the passage are, right? So I encourage you to try to craft your own formulas for writing if you're a bit bored by the ones that I'm presenting you with. But if you're not sure or you're weak, rest assured you can use the ones I'm giving you and you will do better than you would on your own. Got it? Good. Yeah. It's kind of like, I used to always use a metaphor of like the Smith machine in the gym, but I'm gonna bypass that today. Anyway, introductions, interpretation sentences, turn the page. This is the hardest sentence to write. This is the sentence that roadmaps your commentary. It also provides